You've got to be joking. They can't be serious. Welcome to another edition of YesAuto News. I'm Cam Tate and I'm afraid I've got some really terrible news. French media is reporting that Renault is planning a major reshuffle of the business in a bid to save €2 billion. If true, it would mean the closure of its facility in Dieppe, which was the former headquarters of Renault Sport but is now the home of the Alpine A110. Not only would the closure put hundreds of jobs at risk, but it could also see the end of the A110 and, dare I say, the end of Alpine. Now, we see car brands come and go all the time, but let me explain why the loss of the A110 and Alpine would be a complete travesty. See, while the Alpine A110 may have only launched in 2017, it is in fact a reboot, or a reimagining, of the Alpine A110 sports car from the 1960s. The A110 was an elegant rear-engined two-seater sports car that could be considered as the French equivalent of the 911. And like the 911, the little Alpine was a demon on the rally stage. A110s were piloted to 6 World Rally victories in 1973, the inaugural season of the WRC, which was enough for Alpine to secure that year's Constructors' Championship. But the A110 was arguably Alpine's peak. Sure, the company released a series of new models over the decades, but none of them quite lived up to the extremely high bar set by the A110.
Alpine A610, le style, la fougue et la nouveauté. Nouvelle ligne extérieure, bouclier avant intégrant les phares longue portée, les anti-brouillards et les clignotants. Ailes avant et arrière déformables. Jante alu 16 pouces.
Come the early 1990s, Alpine sales were shrinking fast, prompting Renault to scrap the Alpine name and instead focus on its new performance brand, Renault Sport. At the time, an Alpine return seemed about as likely as Lancia building a Delta that wasn't based on an old Fiat. However, Renault actually tried relaunching the brand several times throughout the 2000s, and then in 2017, Alpine returned. The A110 was both modern and classic, mixing in elements of the original Alpine, like the circular headlights and that distinct bonnet crease, with contemporary underpinnings and a mid-mounted turbocharged engine. In many ways, other than it no longer being rear-engined, the A110 is still France's 911, and it was a critical hit. Despite only producing 248 brake horsepower and 320 Nm of torque, which comes from a 1.8-litre turbocharged 4-cylinder engine, the car's ultralight 1,100 kilogram weight and 7-speed dual-clutch transmission proved to be the perfect recipe for a sports car. In fact, if you head over to YesAuto.com, you can read Leon Poltny's review of the sharper A110S. He describes the base car as having a driving experience that only the likes of Lotus, Caterham and Porsche stand a chance of matching. High praise for a car that seemingly came out of nowhere. And as I just mentioned, Alpine released a hotter A110S, which gained 40 brake horsepower and a new suspension setup. And yes, it was a critical hit, although some argued that the standard car was so good it didn't merit the upgrade. So what's with the Alpine obituary? If it's such a good car, why would Renault want to get rid of it? Well, the A110 may be popular with us car journalists and proper die-hard car fans. Sales have been a little lackluster. Prepare yourself. I'm about to throw out some numbers. According to Car Sales Base, the company sold 4,400 examples of the A110 in Europe in 2019, considerably more than the 1,950 it shifted the year before. Those numbers aren't exactly what you'd call small. After all, Lotus sells less than 1,000 cars a year in Europe, and they're doing great, sort of. But Alpine isn't really going up against Lotus. Well, not in terms of sales anyway. The French car maker needs to sell the A110 in bulk to make the project worthwhile. One of the highest selling sports cars on sale is the Porsche Cayman, and the German car maker sold over 7,000 examples in Europe last year and more than 8,000 the year before. Still, having been on sale for only 3 years, you'd think Renault's done a pretty good job with the A110, right? Right? Time for some more numbers. Renault is said to be unhappy with how many A110s sold in Europe during the first quarter of 2020. The company sold 67 cars in January and 61 in February, compared to the 430 and 350 examples it sold in the same respective months last year. My first thought when seeing those numbers were, well, the coronavirus kicked off at the beginning of the year, so no one could go out and buy cars. But that's not really the case. COVID-19 didn't really impact Europe until mid-February, so that doesn't really explain why sales were so poor in January. Also, the company sold over 127 cars in March, when most of the continent was under lockdown. So not only have A110 sales been a disappointment for reasons I'm not completely aware of, I wouldn't be surprised if this has a knock-on effect on the rest of the company. And what part of Renault is a constant and expensive disappointment? Renault spends around 200 million euros a year on its F1 programme, which, for a manufacturer team, isn't too bad. Reigning champions Mercedes-AMG spend north of 300 million euros a year on its F1 team, but there's one key difference between the two teams. Merc is always in with a chance of winning, while Renault typically finishes in the lower realms of the top 10 when its cars haven't blown up. And now they've lost Daniel Ricciardo, who was an incredibly expensive hire in the first place, and its engine supply deal with McLaren expires at the end of the season. With poor race performances and dreadful reliability since its return to F1 as a factory outfit in 2016, you wonder why Renault would want to fork out even more money on the costly rule changes due in 2022. And given that the company is keen to become an EV maker, F1 really doesn't fit into the picture anymore. That all sounds extremely terrible, but don't worry, there is some good news. Renault has allegedly secured a €5 billion loan from the French government to help it get through these difficult times brought on by the coronavirus pandemic. Now, we don't know how the money is going to be spent, but we certainly hope that it secures the hundreds of jobs at the Dieppe facility and keeps the Alpine A110 going for many, many more years to come. And we also hope that it saves the F1 team. Sure, they may be a bit rubbish, but they've got Esteban Ocon racing for them this year, and Fernando Alonso is expected to make a return next season. And that's a really exciting prospect. Plus, you know, it's a historic team, and losing them again would be a travesty. Anyway, I'd like to know what you think about this. Will you miss the A110 if Renault pulls the plug on it? And what about the F1 team? Do you think that F1 would be worse off without Renault on the grid in 2021? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll come and join you. That's it for another episode of YesAuto News. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm sorry it was such a downer. If you're looking for something a little bit more lighthearted, why not check out my Little Tykes Cozy Coupe review by clicking on the link in the top right hand corner. And if you liked our episode today, why not subscribe to the channel and, I don't know, drop us a like down below? Anyway, I've been Cam Tate. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week.